Revenge films.
My name is Michelle. I'm currently 27 years old and I work full-time at a department store. I have a husband named Kevin. We got married about 3 years ago, but we don't have any children between us yet. But there was a reason behind that, and that was because my husband's income was very low. Kevin was working at a small-medium enterprise in the sales department. Normally, a job in sales should have a good income from commission, but it turns out that my husband wasn't good at his job. Because of that, his income wasn't increasing and his salary remained low. Due to this, we were in a situation that I also had to work full-time in order for us to make ends meet and be able to have enough money for living expenses. But on top of all of this, my husband was quite reckless with money. As long as there was money available to him, he would spend it all. And that's why I was managing all of the household finances. I had actually been working at the same department store since I was single, and before I met Kevin, I loved my job and I felt rewarded by it as well. Because of that, even though my husband had a low income and I had to work in order to support our family, I never once felt upset about it, and I still felt satisfied with my life. However, recently, that started to change. Kevin started trying to get me to quit my job and was insisting on it. The reason behind that was because he wanted me to take care of his mom, my mother-in-law. Kevin's family house was located in a place that took about an hour and a half by car from our home. Since Kevin and I were both working full-time, we weren't able to go visit them very often, and according to him, that was upsetting that he wasn't able to go see his mom more. But my mother-in-law wasn't ill, she was actually perfectly healthy. On top of that, Kevin had an older brother who lived near them. So there was absolutely no reason that I should have to step in and take care of her. That's why I couldn't understand why Kevin was insisting that I quit my job and go take care of her. Every single time that she would start the conversation that he wanted me to quit my job, I would reply to him, "If I quit my job, how are we supposed to survive? We won't have enough money for our living expenses." When I said that to him, Kevin would get angry and say,
"Even though you're my wife, do you not know what it means to support your husband?"
He would get worked up and I wouldn't receive any answer to my question. But for now, I decided to ignore Kevin's nonsense and continued working. That is until one day, when I arrived at work, I was suddenly called out by my manager to his office. I had no idea what it could be about, so when I asked him, "How can I help you, sir?" My manager showed me a piece of paper, and that was a letter of resignation with my name on it. According to him, he said that it arrived by mail to his office that morning, but he said that given the handwriting, it was clear that it wasn't written by me. And he thought it was suspicious and called me to his office. Of course, I hadn't written any letter of resignation nor sent anything in the mail, but I immediately knew that my husband must have been behind this. I assured my manager that I had no intention of quitting, and that night I confronted my husband about this mysterious letter of resignation. When I spoke to Kevin, he didn't seem to have an ounce of regret, and with a sour look on his face, he quickly admitted to falsifying the letter of resignation and sending it in, and then he said,
"You only have yourself to blame. This is your fault for not listening to what I told you to do."
And for some reason, he was pissed off at me. I couldn't forgive him for this, so I fought back. "I already told you, didn't I, that I have no intention of quitting my job and that we can't survive if I do?" But then Kevin replied,
"If you can't take care of my family and do as your husband says, you're a failure as a wife."
When I heard that, I was furious. There was no point continuing this conversation because he wasn't listening. So I went back to my room and decided to focus on calming down my anger. But without an apology, I couldn't forgive him, and for a while after that, I didn't speak to my husband. 1 week later. As usual, I was heading home after my day of work, but as soon as I walked in the door, I was taken by surprise. Sitting in the living room waiting for me was my husband, as well as my mother-in-law, both with terrifying looks on their faces. This was the first time ever that my mother-in-law had come over to our house in the evening, so I immediately knew that this was probably a big deal. As soon as my mother-in-law saw my face, she glared at me and said, "What? So you hate me so much that you're that against taking care of me?" Right off the bat, she was raising her voice at me and continuing on top of that.
"A woman like you that doesn't even have a shadow of kindness? We're getting a divorce."
And he shoved divorce papers in my face. I was so shocked that the only thing I could say was, "What?" But then Kevin continued,
If you don't want to get a divorce, then do as I say and quit your job.
And for some reason, he was full of confidence. Then my mother-in-law added, "You need to quit your job and come and live with us to take care of me." At that very moment, I finally understood why my husband had suddenly started telling me to quit my job. I remember that when Kevin and I first got married, my mother-in-law wanted us to live with her. And that was because we didn't have any children. Kevin's older brother and his wife already had 3 kids, and I remember my mother-in-law muttering one day that if they lived with her, she would never be able to relax with the kids in the house. But because of my lazy mother-in-law, I knew that Kevin's family home was a disaster that was always messy and full of trash. And so I had told Kevin that there was no way I would ever be able to live with her. But then Kevin would respond,
"Then you can just clean it up for her. It's as simple as that."
That was always his response, but I used the reason that I was allergic to house dust and blatantly refused. But over the years, my husband refused to give up on this point. When it came to this problem, Kevin and I had discussed so many times that I thought we had already resolved it between the two of us. And yet he was shoving divorce papers in my face like he was threatening me. I was furious with my husband and my mother-in-law who were trying to have their way with me. I stood my ground and firmly said, "I already told you many times that I'm not going to live with your mom." But then my husband exclaimed,
"Then we're getting a divorce."
And then he went into my room and started throwing my belongings out of the house through the front door. "Stop it! What are you doing?" I tried to stop him, but he was ignoring me, and my husband was wildly throwing my clothing and my belongings out the front door. And as she watched him, my mother-in-law was laughing, saying, "This is only the obvious outcome. You did this to yourself." I ran out the front door and tried to start picking up my belongings that were scattered everywhere. And as if to seal the deal, Kevin reached into my purse and grabbed my house keys. He threw my shoes out the door, slammed the front door shut, and I heard the door lock. I had no other choice but to continue picking up my belongings and putting them in the car. That day, I drove straight to my parents' house. My parents lived in a town that took over 2 hours to get to by car, but I had nowhere else to go. Luckily, I had the next day off of work, so I wasn't too worried, and I was able to drive over even though it was late in the evening already. When I finally arrived at their house, my parents welcomed me in, but they were worried given how late at night it was and when they saw all the stuff in my car. With tears in my eyes, I told my parents everything that happened 2 hours ago back home. Of course, they were furious. My dad started saying that we were going to drive straight back to my house and confront my husband and my mother-in-law. He was raging, but my mom helped me stop him. And that night, I decided to just rest at their home. But when I got into bed and I was thinking to myself, I couldn't help but be angry with my husband and my mother-in-law at what they did to me. And I knew that I couldn't forgive them. And I stared at the piece of paper that my husband had thrown at me, the divorce papers that he had already filled out. The next day, my parents said that we were going to go to Kevin's family's house, so I contacted Kevin and let him know that we were coming. When he finished work, we agreed to meet at his family house. When my parents and I arrived at Kevin's family home, his mother-in-law looked uneasy when we walked in the door, and Kevin was simply hiding behind his mom, shaking in his pants. Immediately, my father demanded that they explain what happened yesterday. By then, my mother-in-law and Kevin were simply squirming and wouldn't answer. But then my father raised his voice.
"Hurry up and explain. Do you not hear me? I'm asking you what the hell my daughter did to you to deserve this."
He was yelling at them. Then my husband finally spoke up and in a small voice said,
Michelle insisted that she wasn't going to live with my mom, so I was just trying to convince her, that's all.
And then in front of my parents and my mother-in-law, I explained once again that we weren't able to make ends meet on just my husband's salary, and that's why I had continued working all this time. But then my mother-in-law chimed in, saying, "If you're going to live at our family house, then surely you can easily live off Kevin's salary. He's making enough." But I wasted no time and immediately grabbed all of the pay slips that I had prepared in advance. And along with that, I also showed them the household expenses that were going out every month. And when my mother-in-law saw that Kevin was recklessly spending more than what his own salary was, her attitude instantly changed. "So, You're only bringing home $1,500 per month, and yet between your outings, your cigarettes, eating out, and whatever else you're spending money on, $1,800 a month. What is going on here? Explain it to me." I heard Kevin whisper,
"Oh no,"
in a small voice, and then he went silent. Forget living off of Kevin's salary. If anything, with his income, we're resulting in a deficit. After seeing the evidence, my parents and my mother-in-law seemed so over it that nobody could say a word. My mother-in-law finally seemed to understand that we wouldn't be able to survive if I quit my job. And as if to flip a switch entirely, this time she said to me, "Please, forget what we said about living together, but I hope you'll continue to look after my son from now on." And suddenly tried to change the tune, but I had already made up my mind, so I replied, "It's already too late. I already filled out the divorce papers and I turned them into the city office earlier this afternoon." Since I had the day off of work that day, it was easy. I had thought hard about it all night, and in the end, I decided to turn in the divorce papers. Not only did he try to threaten me in order to make me live with his mother, he wasn't even providing enough for our living expenses, and then he kicked me out of the house. I realized that I can't continue living my life with somebody like that. So, when I told everybody about what I had done, everybody was shocked. And then my husband started panicking.
"You're kidding, right? The divorce was just a little threat. I wasn't serious about it."
He started throwing a tantrum, but it was already too late.
"Wait a minute, I don't want to get a divorce. Michelle, I'll apologize for what happened yesterday, so you have to forgive me, please."
I turned my back on Kevin, and my parents and I stormed out. After that, I kicked my ex-husband out of the house that we were living in, and I decided to continue on with my life. After he was kicked out, Kevin returned to his family home. But not only was he not providing any living expenses, it only caused more burden to his mother, who was living on Social Security, and their relationship completely fell apart. As a result, I got multiple phone calls and messages from my ex-husband that he wanted to come back to me. But of course, I denied all of his requests, and I chose to enjoy my single life. I was still in my 20s, so I held up hope that I would meet somebody better than my ex-husband. And I looked forward to this next chapter of my life. After fighting every day with his mother, I heard that Kevin became depressed, and he ended up quitting his job and became holed up at home. In order to somehow support him, Kevin's mother had to borrow money from relatives that eventually nobody wanted anything to do with them. Even though she got what she wanted of living together with her son, I'm sure my mother-in-law was only going to suffer for the rest of her life. But this was everything that they brought upon themselves, so I hope my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law regret what they did to me forever.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.